today. So
I usually have too much to say, so you can shut me
We
up.
are live. Welcome to Just Two Dads. For anyone that's tuning in with us, we don't have anybody on just yet, but we thank those of you for watching that join us each week. As you know, if you have seen us before, it's just what it says. It's just two dads talking about different perspectives on what it's like to raise children with special needs. And very often we come from a dad's perspective, but we try not to be locked in there. And today we have an amazing guest who is a fellow special needs warrior, and her name is Georgiana Junco-Kelman. Georgiana, hello and welcome.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Well,
Today
thanks for
you're two
being
dads, just two dads and a lawyer today.
here. Yeah, there you go. Two dads and a lawyer. That's what the episode is.
that's it.
So before we kind of get started and jump into your services and what we do, what you do, what I'd like to do is at least start off with your story. What led you to doing what you do? I know that it's related to your son and his diagnosis as well, but still, even in that situation, it takes a special individual to do what you do. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got to that point, and a little bit about your path?
Sure. So yeah, I had absolutely no intent whatsoever of traveling down the special education path. In fact, I had no idea what special education was, special education law. And many of us that are traveling down this path as attorneys in this area of the law is because we've been personally impacted. My son was born perfectly fine. And within 8 weeks or so, we discovered he was born with a brain malformation, which was discovered as a result of seizures, very catastrophic type seizures that were literally frying his brain. Long story short, after lots of research and opinions, we'd been told he needed to have his left brain removed because he wouldn't really be able to develop because the malformation, which was causing the seizures, was basically frying his brain, which meant he wouldn't have a chance to develop. And so we went to all over America looking for opinions and searching what to do because we had conflicting opinions. Some doctors said, don't touch the brain, let's do medications. Others said, let's do the surgery immediately. Long story short, we opted for medication and opted to wait for the surgery. He is 1 in a million cases where the seizures didn't return. He never needed the surgery, and which meant he now had a chance to develop. But because of the malformation, he has global developmental delays. He's got physical disabilities. He's got, severe processing disorders, language disorders. But he's an amazing kid who just turned 18. And he's been fully included in his education from day one, which is how I started this journey with him. I learned very quickly, very early on in my journey with him, how difficult this road is for parents and how little information parents are actually given. Everything I learned was through blood, sweat, and tears of finding it out because nobody told me. And I was fortunate enough to come across people in my journey that were able to guide me. And so that guidance inspired me to help others. Long story short, I pivoted from a criminal defense career and started sort of helping families organically. Next thing I know, I kind of organically developed a law practice. And 15 years later, here I am. And I would say my main mission, one of my main missions in what I do is full inclusion for our kiddos, for them to be seen for who they are, to not be limited, to not be, placed in very restrictive settings without the opportunity of exposure to their social typical peer models. As we know that social environment, that interaction is crucial for our kids' social skills development. And so that's how my path is. They tried to pigeonhole my kid, and I knew there was so much more potential to him. And in my own path, I discovered that absolutely full inclusion is a thing, although oftentimes parents aren't told that it's an option for kids like ours. And so that is how I ended up in the road that I'm on at the moment. It's been 18 years. He just turned 18 this summer, and he's in high school. He's a senior in high school.
Wow. How deep into criminal defense were you at the time of his diagnosis?
As deep as you can get. I worked for a criminal defense firm for 7 years, and then I took some time off to figure out, my son needed me, and I left. I stopped practicing for a little bit of time. Sort of, my husband has a criminal defense practice, but I kind of still kept my toes wet. I kept working with him because I was the kind of mom that I still needed an outlet. You know what I mean? As moms, we tend to become fully absorbed in our lives and in our children, and sometimes we forget about ourselves. So when I could, I would still kind of dabble and keep myself a little busy outside of this very daunting world with my son that I was in. It's very difficult to do that, but I tried. Anyhow, long story short, I was actually asked by Johnny Cochran's office at the time to start the Hispanic criminal division. So I was at this crossroads in my life where I was either going to go to the sure thing, which would have been very lucrative, and it would have been exactly what I had gone to law school for, or I now had an opportunity to help families, having no clue where that would go. But it was clear to me my calling was to help special needs families, to be able to impart the knowledge that I learned, and because there's a certain gravitas that comes along with the personal experience that you have. I apply my experience to my clients. And so it's a really easy litmus test for me in this determining whether or not my clients are getting what they need. I apply my own example and I ask myself the question, is this good enough for my kid? That is a really fast yes or no. And I know right away, this isn't enough. And so I keep going. And I felt the calling. I knew that this was the right thing to do. It was the right path to go on. And it's been the most fulfilling, wonderful, amazing journey that I've taken in my life. And I don't regret a second of it.
Wow. Wow. So you answered my next question without me even having to ask it, which was, and this is.
I talk a lot.
What'd you say?
I said, I told you I talk a lot.
That's more than okay. That's okay. It's one thing to talk a lot. It's another thing to talk a lot and add value, and you're doing both. So thank you so much. But I was going to ask you about, we try to make sure that we're touching on things that blanket special needs and beyond, that just deal with people, touch the spirit and the soul, because whether we're divided by political views, especially now, race, religion, whatever the case is, we have to pay so much attention to the things that we have in common versus otherwise. And so we want to make sure that we do that here. And one of the things that is a universal theme is a person finding their purpose. I was going to ask you, but you already answered it, which was, when you get to the crossroads and your purpose is there, for some people it's kind of difficult to step into. But when you're put in a situation where you're advocating for your child, it seems like it's a no-brainer, and you already touched on some of that. And I think that for some parents, especially that are raising someone with special needs, we're going to talk about the services you offer and education and things like that, because even with the services that Brian and I provide with regard to financial education, again, we don't know, we can't fight for what we are entitled to if we don't know that it's available or what those rights are. Right. So I want to touch on that. But the value of finding a purpose, I know there's got to be a lot of parents out there that have no idea what their calling is, or found it and left it to the side to raise their child depending on what their disability might be. So before we get into your services and everything, what do you have to say to someone that's trying to find their purpose and their cause, and maybe even try to just help their kids survive and be able to thrive and maybe find their own purpose eventually?
It was this voice. It was a pulling. It was almost gravitational, where I was at this juncture where I could pursue a path, like I said, that was probably pretty lucrative and a sure thing. And mind you, this was back in 2007, 2008, where the economy wasn't the best, and so it was a difficult decision for me, because I knew here we are in basically a sure thing is what I was being assured of, or I was going to take my chances with what felt completely natural to me, although not a guarantee. Obviously, financially, I was starting a brand new law practice, and that's a very big gamble, especially at a very uncertain time financially in this country. But to me, it was a calling. It was almost just inherent. I knew that this was the right thing to do. I felt almost an obligation, because I feel like I was given certain gifts in terms of the path I was on. I was able to encounter, luckily, so many people that guided me left or right. But for certain people in my path, I don't know. I wouldn't have gotten to where I got as fast as I did in terms of learning what the right services were, what the right, what the available supports and services and placements were for my son, because I wasn't guided by my district. I wasn't told, here are all your options. Let's discuss all of them. Let's say best for your child. That doesn't happen. Hence why I've been in the job for many, many years. I'm gainfully employed for a reason, is why I always say. They don't tell you this. And so oftentimes you have to rely on that community that's already walked your path. And I felt that I had met so many wonderful people that helped me, that gave me this light, and that now I needed to impart that on others. I felt an obligation to now help so many families that were walking that similar path. And so for me, it was an inner calling. It was an inner voice. It wasn't a question. I needed to sort of overlook the logical, because sometimes, your logical mind tells you this is what you're supposed to do, but your heart got you. You know what? No, this isn't what I'm being told to do. And for me, it was this feeling of this is what I'm meant to do, and also I have an obligation to help other families. I almost felt like but for me, I'm not going to be certain families aren't going to get what they need to get, and it's going to change their lives. And it's the most rewarding. There's nothing more incredibly rewarding to be able to have a career where I can impact the life of a child that otherwise, but for our interaction, perhaps would have had a very different outcome. So that's my moral outcome, and one of the reasons why I chose it.
We find that to be very similar in the work
so tell us. Go ahead, Brian.
Sorry, it's the same kind of experience that Sean and I have. We work in the area of finances, and we know that so many families just don't have access to, the kinds of financial products and services that, by the way, are made available, but nobody talks to, the average middle American family, right? And so we feel the same. So we're kindred spirits when it comes to that. And two sides of the same coin. So I love that you're doing that work. That's amazing. Good. But I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, it's okay. I was going to ask you, so kind of twofold. Because some people that have been watching from the very beginning are still trying to figure out, okay, exactly what do you do where education is concerned. And so the first one is tell our audience exactly what services you provide. And then the other thing is, if my child is given a diagnosis of some kind of developmental disability or something like that, your services or the need probably doesn't even come in until the child is of age where they're going to go to school. Is that fair to say? And then two, if you can go ahead and tell everyone a little bit about what you provide, and quite frankly, without just directly promoting what you do, just from an honest standpoint, if someone doesn't turn to someone like you, what are their options?
I'm about to say something that's probably pretty grim, and I'm not saying it to try and procure business. Trust me, I'm busy. But there was a time when I did a lot of webinars and I do speaking engagements, and I would always tell families, listen, educate yourselves, learn all that you can, know your rights. When they give you the procedural guidelines, read them so you can empower yourself and you know what process to follow. Even if you can't hire an attorney, you empower yourself with knowledge and you pursue this road on your own, and you be relentless about it. And in my experience, where we are today and what I have seen over the years, I now tell families, lawyer up. I mean, that's just the reality. And I see that based on my experience from families that come to me. And I see the history of where they've been. And I see how poorly served their children have been, intentionally so. I believe that administrators and teachers, they're well-intended, but they are working within a very limited framework. And oftentimes, for many reasons, not the least of which is budgetary constraints, they're given marching orders as to what to offer. And so oftentimes the reality is children are offered the bottom of the barrel. I can give you an example of a particular blue ribbon school in my area that is notorious for violating child fine laws. Child fine means that if there's a suspicion that a child has a disability impacting learning, districts have a legal responsibility to find, identify, and assess that child to determine whether or not that child qualifies for special education services. That is a legal obligation. Right. Parents don't have to prove, and this is what's so crucial for families to know this, because they're misled about this all the time. Parents don't have to prove that their child has a disability impacting learning. The law only requires a suspicion that something's afoot, and the student should probably be assessed to determine whether or not there's a need. Some kids are assessed and determined they're not qualified, so then you go off to a 504 plan. That happens a lot, though, unlawfully, where they should be qualified, but the parent is instead offered a 504 plan. I've seen that many times. Or they start with a 504 plan when they should have assessed, and it's clear that it's beyond what can be done to assist the child, is beyond accommodations. But what is crucial to know is that the district has that responsibility, and I'm dealing with these sort of affluent schools. You would think it would be the opposite, in certain areas that are rejecting families left and right when they come to you in first grade and second grade and third grade. My child can't read. My child is struggling. And they continually kick the can down there. Let's do an SSPT, which is, the student study team, which is an informal intervention. And I can tell you, in my situation, what I've seen 9 times out of 10, those don't work. You're way beyond that, where the child has to be assessed. But they're repeatedly told, no, no, no. The family finds me. They come to me. That's what family finally, some families finally are so exhausted from trying to, explain that their child has a problem. Everyone is saying their child has a problem, but the teachers aren't referring the student for special education assessments. For whatever reason, the administrators are saying, no, we have to do all these things first. Not true. This is when they come and hire a lawyer, and I send my letter saying there's a clear indication that this child needs to be assessed. The child gets assessed immediately. I can't tell you how many times parents come to me and say, oh my God, I've been asking for this for 3 years. I've been saying this. And parents' requests get ignored. And so sadly, that is when I tell families, consult an attorney. When you're banging your head against the wall constantly, and your child's time is being lost. There's a window that's going to close, especially with kids that have dyslexia, for example. In any disability, autism. The soonest you can identify a child with autism, the best the outcome long-term will be for that child. Every aspect of need for that child. And so often families they don't know, and they're misled, and they're told, things are not true. And families get frustrated, and I have families that come to me crying, mothers that say, oh my God, I didn't know. I'm like, well, how could you know? And there's a lot of guilt in that. I wasted all this time. Well, you were misled and you believed people. And I tell parents, there's just a gut feeling that you have. I always say that. When all else fails, what is your gut telling you? Find a way to knock down those doors, because your gut isn't wrong. If you think there's something wrong with your kid, there likely is. When my child was 6 weeks old and he was having these kind of jerky movements, and like, oh, what is that? We went to the pediatrician 3 times, and each time we were told, no, it's this, it's that. My child had brain malformation, was having massive seizures. But as a parent, I knew, even though I was told it's okay, I wanted to believe that, right? Like, we want to believe, okay, we're being told it's okay, we don't need this. You want to believe that as a parent, but that gut, that voice inside of you is never wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's something else.
Yeah, I think parents, as they go through these experiences when their children, when they suspect something, and it's funny, I don't want to be stereotypical, but I think the way that men and women approach this can follow along stereotypical lines. So to your point, right. You're like, you're a mom. You're like, I'm like, my whole life is around this child, and men are like, oh, I'm gonna go throw myself into work, and then, pretend that problem doesn't exist.
And, right. I mean, you're being hypervigilant. It's fine. Relax. You're a new mom. You're just being too emotional. It's okay. Like, no, something is telling me that something's off, and I was right all along.
But then when we go to talk to the schools, and we go talk to administrators, or we go talk to our pediatrician, they say, oh, it's fine, it's normal, it's okay. You go to the school and they say there's nothing wrong, or there are limitations to what we can provide. The families go, well, okay, well, what do we do now? And to your point, some will take on that role of being an advocate. I mean, I think we all want to be advocates for our children, no matter where they fall, even if they're neurotypical. But once we kind of bang our heads against the wall, and we feel, to your point, in our gut, there's some issue here. We need to be able to go someplace and find answers and find resources, and then hopefully find somebody that provides the kind of service that you provide. I know for our family, we found an advocate that helped to give us some guidance and lead us on that path.
I tell families, really a simple place to start, even when you're agitated and you're upset and you feel like there's information they're not giving you and they're ignoring you. Ask for your parents' rights. Worst case scenario, even if they're denying your special education assessment, say, you know what, can I get the booklet with the parents' rights and procedural guidelines that I know that you have, and start there. And that will show you, oh, wait a minute, there's all of these things that they need to do. And at least now you've empowered yourself with that language. Wait a minute, you say that you're not going to assess my child, but right here it says all we have to do is show that my child has to have a suspected disability. I think he does, and here's why. Why aren't you assessing? And then, ultimately you're going to end up potentially appealing things. You want to document everything. I always tell families that always document the rejections. If you're emailing, it's probably the best way to do things, is get it all in an email, because ultimately you're going to end up going to fight for that which you were denied for a long time. And so it's important to start there, at least know what your basic rights are, so you know which road to take next and whether you have to go see a lawyer, or, you want to document things properly, because ultimately, in my experience, families end up with attorneys because they have no other option. And that is sadly the only language they respond to is, the one that involves legal threats. That's just the sad reality of it. Like in anything in life, sad.
So that's the second time. That's the second time you answered my next question without me asking it. Well, so obviously you're clairvoyant too. But because I was going to ask, where does one begin? So you have a child, you go to school, there is no diagnosis. You begin with thinking maybe something's wrong or whatever. You mentioned that you start with the rights, because those things are given at an IEP. So where does that process come in? Because to be honest with you, my memory's foggy trying to figure out IEPs have become just such a way of life for us now that I don't even remember when the first one came about, getting ready for it. But I do remember feeling so unprepared and feeling like, I think we were really lucky, because I think what happened is it was presented to us, and it just seemed to me that, we should probably take this home and look at it, and then, we'll get back to you. And the district was very supportive of that. And now, and if we had been in a school district that was going to lean on us a little bit and said, well, we need to have you sign those today, I don't know, might have been able to have been taken advantage of. So what are your thoughts on that and the direction?
That happens a lot. I always tell families, take your time. Nothing has to happen this second. And so once you've gotten past the assessment process and now that let's say your initial IEP meeting, that is one of the most overwhelming, daunting experiences, because oftentimes you walk into a room and there are like 10 people there, depending on, the level of need that the child has. My IEP meeting usually has like 20 people in it. And
wow.
One of the crucial things for you to do is obviously obtain as much information as you can, so that you can meaningfully participate and offer your feedback and your contribution to what you as a parent think best for your child. Because ultimately, I don't care how many experts are in the room, nobody knows that child like you do. And so after you've gotten past the initial assessment, again, if they keep telling you they're not going to assess, you want to align with your teacher. Go to your teacher. Okay, you're telling me that my child keeps struggling. My child is getting ones and twos and not meeting goals, and the dibbles not performing at benchmark levels. And so gather all that information that you can. And don't just wait for your teacher to do something. You take all of that information that is showing your child is struggling and go straight to your administrator and put it in writing. Here are all my child's struggles. This, and this is happening. I've done the research. I believe you have a responsibility to at least look closer and assess and see whether there's something here that is warranting an IEP and special education services. And so keep banging on that door. Hopefully they will respond and they will formally assess your child. And hopefully you have teachers that tend to align with you and they tend to be your ally, and you really need your teacher's push. Ask your teachers, can you please ask the administrator to assess? Like, if you recommend that based on the deficits that you're seeing and the struggles that this child might need an IEP, they tend to listen to teachers. So teachers can play a really crucial role here in making sure that the district does what it's supposed to do. Sadly, teachers are given marching orders not to, though. That's the problem. And I've seen that all too many times over the years. I have teachers calling me off the record to say things to me. And, my opinion is, obviously, that of my clients, that is the parent's interest. There's no alliance with anybody here. If a teacher tells me, look, I think your child is struggling and needs an IEP, I'm going to go to my, please don't say I told you that it's off the record. There's no off the record. I'm going to go to my administrator and say, look, my teacher just told me this. So oftentimes teachers want to help, but they feel constrained and they're given these orders, to ask the parent to try all these things before they try an IEP. And parents, tend to listen to that. But once you pass that level and you do get the assessments, I always tell families, always ask for your reports ahead of time. Your IEP meeting, especially your first one, like I said, is such an overwhelming meeting. And sometimes you still haven't even come to terms with, all of these new developments about your child's disabilities or deficits. And it's very scary. So you're processing that to begin with. Like, oh my God, what just happened? My child is, he has autism, or he just got the autism diagnosis. So you're dealing with all of that internal process of how to deal with life with my child in general, never mind school. And now you're dealing with, hopefully maximizing what you can do to really be able to support your child. And your goal is to maximize your child's potential and ability to ultimately be successful in life as an independent, contributing member of society one day. And so that starts in school. That starts day one. And so when you go to these IEP meetings, before you go to your meetings, always, always, always ask for your reports ahead of time. You know how exasperating it is, and you may have experienced it. I see this all the time with families. It happened to me. I didn't know. My assessment for my child years ago, they did, I want to say 6 different assessments. It was OT, it was PT, it was speech and language, it was social skills, it was a psychoed, it was academic assessments, all of them. So I walk into my IEP, there's like 15 people there, and I'm giving a mountain of paperwork. Here's all your reports. And then they dive right into the findings. And I'm like, wait, it's so annoying because I don't know what they're saying. The language, as you know, is like, It's a whole language, the acronyms.
Right.
And I'm like, wait a minute. I literally was like, stop. I have no idea what you're saying. I don't know what all of this is. I need the time to review this so I can participate and I can contribute. I don't know what's happening. And my husband and I both stopped the meeting. And my husband had some choice words because it was so frustrating. And I remember thinking, and not only that, when I finally I started to peruse through my psychoeducational assessment, I went straight to the summary to just kind of see what is the final outcome here. And I'm seeing, a diagnosis that isn't correct. I'm seeing description of a kid that isn't mine. I'm seeing a different pronoun, she, all over the place. And I'm like, did anyone here really take the time to learn my child?
Right.
Or did you all just cut and paste from previous reports? Figure it's close enough, so let's just throw that in.
Yeah.
Sadly, that is the reality, because oftentimes it's no one's fault per se. These people are so overwhelmed and under-resourced, and they've got such a caseload. And I'm not pointing fingers at anyone per se, but because we know that is the reality of the world that we are in, you as a parent have an extra due diligence that you have to do. And sometimes you can make that easier on yourself by doing something simple as, hey, in writing, I want my reports before the IEP meeting. I want to be able to, study them, understand what the findings are, so I can meaningfully contribute and meaningfully ask questions. Because as it is, the language is foreign to us. Ultimately, we get used to it, it becomes
right.
Years.
Yeah, it becomes second nature.
But the initial process is such a daunting one. And I see too many families come to me. I have a lot of families come to me after their initial IEP meeting in tears. How can this be? How can they offer me this? And sadly, a lot of families can't afford to go to attorneys, and they get intimidated by that.
Right.
I can't afford it. Many of us offer free consultations. Get to a lawyer, at the very least, get some answers and read and understand, because my heart breaks for the families that go through this system repeatedly, and the kids being passed from year to year, and your child gets to the 8th grade and your child can't read or write. I see that all the time. I have a student right now with an off-the-charts IQ. He's a sophomore in high school. He can't read because he has severe dyslexia. They passed him from grade to grade. Parent was just told all of these, misleading things about their kid. Parent couldn't afford to go and, do private assessments or any of that. So she's just kind of going along with what the district and doing the best she could in all these special day classes continually. A child with off-the-charts IQ. long story short, he gets to sophomore year. She finds me. We have the IEP. I do all the research. I have him privately assessed. The district funds an independent assessment. Comes back off the charts IQ. This child can't read, but it isn't because he isn't absolutely intellectually capable and super bright. The district told the parent, switch to alternate curriculum. It's too late. She was told, it's too late to teach your child to read. Go to functional curriculum, graduate, you can go work at McDonald's, basically. And it's mind-boggling to me that nobody along the way was able to say, this child has dyslexia, and he's clearly appears very smart, very capable. But, and of course, you can imagine the guilt that the parent is going through right now because she believed, the hoodwink, basically.
Right.
And now we're doing everything we can, and we're going to get him in with Bell in an intensive 2-year program, but he's a sophomore in high school.
Wow. There's a couple of things you mentioned that, one, I'm glad you brought up the value of teachers because, people look at things in a pessimistic way depending upon their nature. And so it's always interesting to see how people respond to a diagnosis and the role that it plays with a child. So I know when we hear about the schools the districts not being the most cooperative, some people can tend to see the worst in everything. So the acknowledgement that the teachers are so huge, I think that's fantastic. You mentioned one other thing when you talked about the world in which we live. You've been at this for 18 years on the front lines on behalf of families doing battle with school districts for families. How have you seen, have things changed for the better or for the worse over the last 18 years? And how have they changed for the better or for the worse now that we're in the age of COVID also?
That is a loaded question.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, in terms of evolving and progressing, I can't say we've come so far because if we had, I wouldn't have a job and my field wouldn't be growing. I think that more and more kids are getting more support, proper support, because of attorneys compelling it. That's my experience. That's, in the microcosm that I'm in, I see entirely too much negligence and wrongdoing still. Mm-hmm. We have come a long way. We've moved a long way toward inclusion. There's a lot more opportunity and more mainstream programs being created and ensure, at least theoretically, that our kiddos are fully included or partially included to the extent that they can. Bring them out of the shadows to give them the same equal value as regular students. I have seen that change and the movement toward that. But I'm still seeing bureaucracy and, the procedural component, the well-intended teachers and administrators whose hands are still tied because of budgetary constraints, marching orders from the top. And the reality is, at the end of the day, I don't want to be pessimistic. A lot of it has to do with the numbers game, and it's a cost-benefit analysis. And it's the parents aren't screaming for more. Why give them more? Pay more. I mean, that sounds so pessimistic, but it's what I've seen. It's what I have seen. It's what I continue to see. And not to say we haven't had progress, because we have. Since 1975 with the Old Handicapped Act, we've come a long way, right? And the legislation is there, and the law is there in order to facilitate. We're not lacking rights. The rights are there. It's just a matter of properly invoking them and implementing them and ensuring that you as a parent do everything you can to ensure that your children's rights are invoked. Oftentimes, what still is the information. The clear transparency between parents and schools and how to maximize a child's potential and how to find the most appropriate, truly most appropriate placement and to individualize these programs for these kids, that is still lacking. It's still accommodating your child to the district's resources rather than the other way around. That is absolutely still happening.
This might seem like an odd question. I'm asking for myself out of curiosity, but I know there's other parents out there that might wonder the same thing. And it might be out of your wheelhouse, although I know it's somewhat related. But if say a person decides they want to, you know what, I want to make change. I want to make a difference, and not just going to contribute by standing up for kids. But you know what? I want to start a school. Do you have any idea how somebody goes about doing something like that, and what kind of daunting matter is that?
Good luck. It is not an I've had families to me that say, listen, I've got the resources, I've got the funding, help me start a school. I have a client right now who actually recently said, can we do this? I won't do it because I don't have the time. In an ideal world, there's such gaps that are missing programming that can still be created. But it is very difficult. There's lots of procedure and bureaucracy and, guidelines that have to be met. It's not easy at all. And then once you do get past, all of the protocol to get there, maintaining it is also difficult to do. I've seen many schools fail. And, there's a lot of room in, I think that what needs to happen is that districts need to expand their programming to make them more tailored for the very differences that kids have, because there's usually this or this. No, a bunch of kids in the middle. What happens to those kids? So, for example, the LAUSD or really any district, children with significant dyslexia, they can't learn in a resource model where they're in regular educational day and they're pulled out for 30 minutes, missing instruction that they need, and expected to come back in the classroom and pick right up and keep going. It's not feasible, and science shows it. But there is no programming in most districts, for example, a classroom for children with dyslexia that are otherwise socially developing. The only options you have are specific learning disability classrooms, where it's a gamut of kids with all kinds of disabilities with all different needs that are just bunched up in groups throughout the day, depending on their levels. That doesn't work for a child that's typically developing with dyslexia. So that's what I'm talking about. There's so much programming that still has to be nuanced in order for families not to go outside the district and then have to go fund private schools and then have to sue the district for the, for the funding. That's what I do 24/7 almost every single day, because the programming isn't there. So yeah, there is lots of room to create programming. I'd love for families that, for funding to happen, for families to come together and be able to open schools. But it is extremely challenging to do and costly. And, you do need to do a lot of fundraising, raising a lot of money, because it's not cheap. And, depending if it's a charter school, which there's a whole battle with limiting those, it is definitely not an easy path to pursue.
That's the other direction I wanted to go in. I hope you're still there. We lost Georgiana. I don't know what happened.
We may have lost her for a second.
Yeah.
She was going into an area that I was curious about, because, California, hopefully you'll be able to pull her back up. We're all in Southern California, and our kids are in the Los Angeles Unified School District, which is a massive, massive school district, one of the largest in the country.
Right.
And there's challenges at the school district level, and there's challenges at the state level, and every state, their educational programs are different state by state. And so, families are dealing with these kinds of issues, at every level. It's interesting to see. There's always a fight about breaking up the LA Unified School District. There's always a fight about, what she's just talking about now, privatization and charter schools, and all the funding behind that, and an overhaul of our school systems. Adding special needs programming's huge.
Right, and you and I've talked about that. I've always it's a great idea. Start a school. Okay, you're financially independent and you have the financial wherewithal to do that. Okay, still, what do you do, and what's next, and how thick is the red tape that you have to cut through? And that's what made me ask that question, because I know it's a great idea in theory, but I don't know much beyond that.
And there are schools that are specific to children with learning disabilities, and and in some cases they're social disabilities, but they're mostly learning disabilities and other kinds of issues. There she's back.
There you go.
We have some here, and there you're back. We lost you for a second.
Can you see me now?
Yes.
I can see you.
Can you see me? Okay, it just said it ended, and then it.
Sorry about that. Again, you're.
What's that?
I said you're making this very easy. You're either reading my mind or you're starting down a road where I thought of going. So you and I have been brought together and know each other outside of this from special needs. I work with Autism Speaks and everything. And so I know what your passion is. And as it relates to special needs. So talk a little bit, if you will, about the philanthropic stuff that you do.
Lost her again. She doesn't want
Right
to talk to
right
you.
after that.
See, she doesn't want to talk to you. I don't know what's going on.
Well, we'll just keep going. I'm sure she's going to come back. I don't know how that happened. I have no idea. But I will say, given our experience with technical issues thus far, this is still probably a minor
it's kind
one.
of normal.
Yeah,
It's kind of normal for us.
It's an improvement, just a half a cut above at the very least. But what Georgiana is involved with, she sits on the board of Autism Speaks, but she also is in charge of, and I don't know if she is the founder of it, but an organization called Shane's Inspiration.
Yeah,
And so,
Okay,
there we go.
Okay, there
Get
it
her
goes.
back.
Okay, so talk about your philanthropic and fundraising endeavors. And if you could share some of those, I'm familiar with your work with Autism Speaks, but tell us a little bit about Shane's Inspiration also, how that came about, and all about it.
So funny story. So we're no longer Shane's Inspiration, although we are. Definitely Shane is our inspiration for the organization. We rebranded, and our new name is Inclusion Matters by Shane's Inspiration. We think that Inclusion Matters is more encompassing of our mission. And so, funny story about Inclusion Matters. I was actually going to the park. You know, we are an organization that builds accessible playground for kids of all abilities. The premise is for all kids to play together. And so the parks are built in a way that are accessible, state-of-the-art accessible for all children. So children with wheelchairs, children that have significant sensory type disabilities, including autism. The parks are built to meet and fit those needs. And it's amazing. We've got 72 playgrounds all over the world. Our first is here in Los Angeles at Griffith Park. And my son didn't walk until he was over 3 years old. We were told he would likely never walk or talk. Prognosis that I rejected from day one, because I remember seeing a light in his eye, and I'm like, no, I rejected it. And he started to walk at the age of 3 after starting at a typical little preschool for 2 months. This is why I always say that proper environment of social, typically developing peers that serve as models is so crucial, because my son was motivated and inspired to do what the other kids were doing. I like to call his walking a little bit of a miracle, because it was just something out of the clear blue sky. He just literally one day got up and walked. I kid you not.
Amazing.
And after we've been told we're building our home, they said build the house accessible, build a wheelchair, wheelchair accessibility. You can put in an elevator to make it easier for him. He literally got up and walked one day, like out of the clear blue sky. And but prior to him, and we still went after, but we would go to Shane's Inspiration at the time, the park. And I would take him there because it was the one place that I didn't feel judged. I didn't feel the snarkiness or the stigma that you get from other parents, as I'm sure you're extremely familiar with.
Yes.
And I felt there. I felt included. I felt like those were my people, and nobody looked at me twice. And my son got to roll around and play and do whatever, because the park was built in a way that it had the spacing for him to do that. And so a few years later, a good friend of mine said, I want to introduce you to this organization. Come to the gala with me. And I was already serving on the Autism Speaks board of directors at the time, and I had been doing their gala. And I went to the Shane's Inspiration, Now Inclusion Matters gala, and fell in love with the organization, with the people. Like, the organization had such heart and such meaning in their mission. So incredibly purpose for this. And I just knew this was my calling. And immediately they asked me to start chairing their galas, which I did for Autism Speaks. And I said yes really quick, not realizing how much work I was getting into. But ultimately, I loved it. I loved it till today. I've been with them for 6 years. I chair their annual gala every year, and it's always an incredible event. It's really difficult now because obviously the COVID-19 has impacted, all nonprofits. It's impacting, Autism Speaks. It's impacting Inclusion Matters. And so, we're looking for alternative ways to fundraise right now to make sure that we can keep going with our mission. But it's a really tough time. Our major fundraising events have all been canceled for the year. And right. So, we're struggling. We're working really hard to find alternative ways, but that is how I became involved. And, it's an amazing organization. It's not just about building playgrounds all over the world. It's about our inclusive education programs we have in 40 countries. And so it's about the mission of inclusion educationally and play. Those are the two ways that we incorporate most in the family. Kids with disabilities is through education and play. And so this is education, which is my, and I absolutely love it. It's funny how things go full circle in life, because that is where I went to start with, because I felt there was a place where I felt, included with my kid. And all these years later, it's just really ironic how everything kind of came full circle for me.
I actually have been to Aiden's place over there by Veterans Park in Los Angeles.
We're redoing Aiden's place. We are refurbishing it, and we're going to have the new grand opening of it soon. Fantastic!
It was such a great park, and I've been to Shane's Inspiration, the one in Griffith Park as well. So amazing stuff, and so people should know, they should go to inclusionmatters.org and see the locations of all of these parks where Inclusion Matters has put a stamp on.
Offering at time, if you go on, you also said we're making a great effort right now to assist families virtually. So there's a lot of activities and a lot of different opportunities for kids to engage with our various virtual programs that we're implementing right now in the COVID this COVID climate that we've got going on.
Beautiful.
Wow.
Beautiful. Wow. It's amazing.
That's great.
Amazing. What I was going to ask, Sean started to ask you a question. I was going to ask you as we're going through all of this, and I know we're almost getting to the end of our time together, but talking about COVID and coronavirus, I don't know if we had a chance to do that. How does that, what are families doing now with the homeschooling and how has that changed for you and the practice that you are incorporating in supporting these families?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because this is such important information. And a quick plug, I'm going to be doing a speakup.org webinar tomorrow at 5:00. We're going to really dive into COVID-19 closure and the responsibility of school districts, because, again, families are not being told the whole truth. These IEP meetings, I've been doing back-to-back meetings since April now. And do not be told that your IEP meeting, do not allow them to tell you that your IEP meeting can't be held or it has to be postponed. Absolutely not. Federal law still applies. The Department of Education was very clear in their mandate for the guidelines for COVID. So was the California Department of Education, that IDEA, our Bible in terms of special education law, continues. None of those timelines are suspended, even though some districts are sadly misunderstanding that or choosing not to understand it. But IEPs have to continue via Zoom, and services need to continue via Zoom. Parents who were not provided support last semester, whether it's related services or instruction, are absolutely owed compensatory relief, which means that time has to be made up. There's a misconception that because the district didn't engage in unreasonable delay in providing services, they couldn't help it because of the pandemic, so they think that gives them a pass. It doesn't. The fact is, your child did not receive a free, appropriate public education for whatever reason, which means those services are still owed. The regression didn't stop. A lot of districts are starting to read a statement at the beginning of IEP meetings saying, just because we had the closure and because students weren't provided instruction and related services doesn't mean they regressed. Really? I'm pretty sure. And they're asking people to sign waivers. They're asking families to agree to suspend the IEP and implement distance learning programs instead. And I always say to families, your distance learning program is your IEP. There is no substitute. And so the instruction has to continue to the best of their ability in, employing reasonable efforts. Your child's IEP still has to be applied. And whatever services you were not provided last semester, you are still owed and have every right to pursue demand. And families are being told, no, that's a thing of the past, moving on. Absolutely not.
I hope that you'll share the meetup with us. Put it on the Facebook so we can post it and we can talk about it. We'll help promote that.
Absolutely.
I think families need to know what's happening, and the
what
fact
is
that you're providing that service is
the address. It's speakup.org.
It's if you go to the Facebook page, Speak Up Parents. .org. But if you go to Speak Up on Facebook, you'll see it on there as Speak Up Parents. They're an organization that tries to work hand in hand with the LAUSD in support of special needs families. But and they're advocating for families, and we're trying to get information out there as much as we can, because during this COVID-19 closure, families are being misled. One major thing I want to tell families is there are kids that cannot distance learn. There are kids, it's not feasible. And the wording that's used in guidelines is feasibility. A lot of these kids can't learn through distance learning. And so there are carved exceptions by the California Department of Education that permit ABA therapists, speech and language therapists, OT therapists to come to the home, even teachers. There is clear guidance and permissibility as essential health workers that are permitted to come to the home. The permission is there, the authority is there. Districts are denying it. Not all of them. I can tell you that my child, I like using myself as an example, has his 1.8 at home every day that his school granted because it's what was appropriate for him to distance. He cannot distance learn without that support. Many kids cannot. And the language clearly says it. In-person support is permitted. Sadly, many districts are just blanketly saying no, that's illegal. It's every individualized program for every unique student with an IEP. Every student has to be analyzed based on their unique profile without applying some blanket rule to all of them, because there is permissibility to help these kids at home. Hopefully soon we're going to see, LA County just gave the green light, I think August 24th, and again September 4th, for schools in LA County are permitted now to create small cohorts of at least 10 special ed students in physical schools. So that has not been permitted. Sadly, not all districts are following suit and doing it. But at least we've got a glimmer of hope that we're moving in that direction, where at least our most vulnerable students are going to be permitted, if the parents choose, to come back to school with the teachers that are also opting to teach them. But it's
now,
good
I
to
know
parents need to inquire and ask your administrators, what, because there's not a lot of great communication going on between districts and parents right now.
I'm sure.
You need to be the one to inquire. You need to call. You need to ask, because if you sit home waiting for that phone call, it ain't coming. I can
Not
tell you
gonna
that.
happen.
Right. So that addresses kind of where we are now. I know you to be fearless, but I still want to make sure that I'm not asking questions that get you in trouble or hot water. But I have to ask, as Brian was mentioning Brian was asking when the technology had you leave us for a second there, we were talking about, for people that may be watching that are not in our area, we are in Los Angeles County, and LA Unified is one huge district. The bigger the district, the bigger the challenges. What are some of the things that you might suggest, if it were up to you, with regard to making that machine run just a little smoother and making sure that kids get what they need? I know it's another loaded question. There's a lot of red tape, but
what will ask how to cure cancer.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, it is daunting because it's a massive district. They've got over 750,000 students, and I want to say now close to 90,000 students with IEPs, if not more. So it is an extremely daunting mission for them. However, sadly, there's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a union in the middle. And so there are interests that are being pursued that aren't necessarily child-centered, especially when it comes to children with IEPs. LA County has not given the okay for all children to return to school. However, it has the okay to permit small cohorts for kids that are most impacted, acute illnesses and disabilities. And so there is no reason, given that we've been going through this now, 7 months, that a plan should already be in place to, at the very least, bring these kids back to school. The fact that they've not done it yet, even though I believe that all the tools are in place for them to do it, tells me there are bigger reasons in play than the simple of let's get back to school and get the help they need, because our kids are devolving daily. It is dire straits for these families and these kids. And these are skills that aren't going to be regained or relearned. These kids have a window, and a lot of kids can't sustain not having what they need right now for too much longer, if at all. And so the mechanism is in place. I truly believe that it is absolutely feasible and doable, but you've got powers at play that are preventing it, which is what enrages me. Because certain ideologies, certain agendas, sure, pursue them all you like on your own time. That has nothing to do with getting kids back to school safely. And that's what enrages me. Is I don't want to make things political. But when you are inserting a political conversation as a contingent, that is infuriating, because that has nothing to do with getting kids back to school safely. At the very least, the special ed kids that have been permitted, you've got the light to do it. Don't tell me you're not ready to have stuff to do when it's been how long and you were ready to start school back before the governor can go back?
Right.
Unacceptable to me.
What are your thoughts on the pros and cons of doing something like?
And mind you, these are parents need to know that these are choices that are being made. These aren't
right. What are your thoughts on the pros and cons of breaking up the district, and how difficult is something like that to be done?
I didn't get your last part. You broke up.
Oh, okay. Sorry about. Wow.
Lost her again.
Just one more time. Gee. With about 5 minutes left.
Well, we have 5 minutes left to wrap this up. Hopefully we'll get it back.
Going to be the last question. We might have to save it, but I think even with her coming back the next 5 minutes, I think you'd agree that it's probably a good idea to have her come back and join us for another conversation. Period.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that I wish I had an advocate like Georgiana. We were going through a redoing. I mean, luckily Jordan's mom was a lawyer and she had resources, and so I felt like I had some battle warriors on my side. Yeah,
right.
I would love to have had a Georgiana on my side when I was going through what we were all going through as a family.
Yeah,
we have her there. She's back.
Are you there?
Can you hear us?
Can you guys?
Yeah, we can hear. We can hear. You came back just in time. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I was asking you before we went out. I don't know how tough it is to answer this with the tight window we have, but your thoughts on the pros and cons of breaking up the district.
I can hear you. Yes, I'm not sure why you're stopping it. Okay, sure.
There we go.
What was the last question? I didn't hear your last question.
Sean, ask again.
Oh, I was saying, wow, that's crazy.
We've improved the technology and we've completely destroyed the technology at the same time. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And there was a little window where I was frozen out for a little bit too. So many people on the internet and on Wi-Fi and everything. Man, we've just taxed out the system. It's 2020, isn't it? For crying out loud, we should have better technology in our cities than what we're dealing with. It really is crazy. Well,
she's coming up for the last 5 minutes. Okay, here she comes.
All right.
Okay, I'm back again.
Okay. I was asking you really quick the last question.
Dropping me.
The pros and cons of breaking up the district.
The powers that be, you guys.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Have you caught up with us yet?
She's there, but it's frozen on our end.
We may have frozen.
Oh, wow. Well, at least she hasn't gone yet.
Well, if we get it, I think we can
the pros and cons of it?
Oh, there she
breaking
is.
up the district?
She's back. Yeah.
Yes.
There we go.
Because you're coming in a little.
Oh my gosh. Are you serious?
It's so funny. Sort of like asking, and now the most important question of the hour.
Yes, I've saved the best for last.
Hey, we're live. That's what happens, right? Nothing's changed here.
Yeah.
Just fascinating conversation. She's talking about the things that most families who don't have children on learning disabilities have no idea. These are the kinds of things that we deal with.
Right, and I'm compelled. I keep feeling like, did I miss anything? I want to make sure that we're adding as much value for people as we can. Are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can hear you. We can hear you. The
Okay,
pros and cons.
Can you guys see me?
We can see you.
Okay, I'm back. I'm not sure what's happening.
No.
But your question, I think, was the pros and cons for breaking up the district.
Correct.
You guys are frozen now.
We'll come back because we're hanging out.
Can you hear me? So your question was the pros and cons. LAUSD, all pros, absolutely, 100%. It's the problem. It's too big.
I think she said we should break up the district. I think that's what she was saying.
Yeah, she said that, and then it's too big. We should break it up. Yes.
Yeah, I think and I think this is one of those challenges, right? People don't realize that teachers, administrators, and parents, it's kind of like the executive branch, judicial branch, right? And that the congressional branch, right? There's three axes here that we're required to come together to make things work in the school district, in the school system, and sometimes the administrators are more focused on money coming in, and teachers are trying to educate their kids, and parents want the best for their kids. So when you have a large district and they're dealing with money issues and financial restrictions, the administrators try to tie the hands of the teachers and restrict what parents can get access to. And when you have a large district, it becomes so cumbersome that they can't really take care of students properly.
It's almost untenable.
It is untenable. Agreed.
In my opinion, break it up into 4 different districts. There's no doubt this district is so big. There's so many demands and so many competing interests.
And it grows. Doesn't it continue to grow too? Then?
Well, yes and no, because there's a competition with charter schools. So there's that struggle, which is one of the unions. Some of the beef of the unions is that they want to shut down charter schools because more and more parents are, immigrating over to charter schools. Okay. And so you are seeing actually a decline. Still a huge district. And like I said, many competing interests. And bureaucracy-wise, it's massive. I mean, I can tell you that even what I see in the special education appellate department, in the due process component of things, once you have an IEP, you disagree with the district, you file your complaint, and you're now in the process proceedings for the LAUSD. And then there, the balls that get dropped, the amount of money that gets spent on private school tuition for kids with IEPs because the district does something as negligible as not contacting a family for their annual IEP meeting because they're in private school.
Right.
Drops that ball, parents file their due process complaint, they get the tuition for the year. Even when the district does have a feasible argument of an appropriate placement, it's an automatic reimbursement because you failed to meet the annual IEP timeline. And this is what parents need to know also. Just because you are in private school does not mean that the district does not have an obligation to find you every year and offer you your IEP meeting, offer you place. If you disagree, then you can go ahead and file due process and pursue your tuition reimbursement. But oftentimes the district, they spend millions of dollars, I'm here to tell you, on private school tuition because they're so big. You would think they would have like just an office dedicated to contacting families in private school. Put on an alarm system, whatever it is you need to do. But something as simple as that, they're bleeding money because they're too big to manage it, or they're too I guess it's so large the incompetency is seeping through the walls because it's so big to manage.
Wow. Well, we're just at our hour, and despite the technical difficulties, we want to thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Anytime I have an opportunity to directly talk to families, it's my pleasure.
Thank you so much. And you're only our second guest, so this is a new entity in and of itself. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and I'll talk to you guys soon.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Georgiana. That's amazing. Okay. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.
That was awesome, Sean.
That was great. That really was great.
I mean, people who know me know that I don't sit for minutes without saying anything. So the fact that it was so compelling that I just sat there listening, taking it all in, I thought that was incredible.
That was great.
And I think we should include Georgiana in our sort of as we start to build a resource guide of places to go and folks whose services are needed. We can start to build a Just Two Dads resources guide where we include Georgiana.
Definitely. I want to send a big thanks to Sean Hall for being our unofficial producer and making sure that everything is monitored and posted there in the chat. I want to thank everyone that took the time to tune in. As you see, the technology is getting better, so are we. We thank you for tuning in with us, and be sure to let us know about any kind of topics or anything that you might want to hear about. We're always open to that. And again, as always, remember that there's somebody out there, someplace that really needs your prayers. There's somebody out there, someplace that is looking for a better way in this world. There's somebody out there, someplace that wants to be heard. So everybody, remember that. I want to personally thank, as a parent and warrior, my partner in Thrive at Home, my wife, Laura, And Brian, I want to thank you. This is just such a pleasure and a gift. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
I love it. Thank you too, Sean. It's amazing.
Right.
Amazing
Take
stuff.
care.
Beautiful,
Right.
buddy. Love you. I'll
Thanks.
talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.